Ground level theology, breaking it down, making the complex simple. No need to frown, bringing the wisdom from the tower to the street. Making theology enjoyable for everyone we meet. No need for big words, no need for fuss. Ground level theology for all of us. Exploring the depths, unraveling the mysteries, taking on a challenge, simplifying histories. Ground level theology, oh yeah, making sense of the concepts, loud and clear. No need to be a scholar, no need to be elite. Ground level theology, making it sweet.
Welcome back, folks, to Ground Level Theology, the podcast that tries to do the most. No, I'm just kidding.
We do.
Welcome back, folks, to Ground Level Theology. With me, as always, is the co-host to Ground Level Theology, Dave Hoffman. Dave, welcome back.
What is up? You can be hostess and I'll be little Davy.
I'll be hostess, you be the mostest. All right.
Oh, okay. No, you will.
Oh man, we got a good one today. This one, folks, I gotta confess, this one's actually coming off of a class that I'm teaching right now, and Dave and I talked about this, and I thought it would be a good episode actually because that I've gotten this question a lot, Dave. I don't know if you've gotten this question from people regarding translations and translation history and how can we have so many different ones and where did they all come from and are they any different and all that stuff. I don't know. Do you
Yeah.
get those questions?
I have, and then no one knows how loaded of a question it is, though, when they ask
Yeah.
it. That's all. And I always have to, I answer just like, I'm just being like, doing what Jesus did. I'll just answer their question with a question, and I'll be like, do you really want to know? No. It's like, I'm like, do you have, this is a short version. Do you have at least 10 to 15 minutes?
Right.
And you try to it's not a 5-minute answer.
Yeah,
That's why
it's
we're
not.
giving a whole podcast
I think they're
to it.
hoping too that it's as simple as different publishers, so they just have to come up with a different name. No.
It's like, no, I'm sorry. Let's just think of the Bible here. Okay. 66 different books, centuries and centuries and centuries apart, 40 different authors, 2 different languages, some Aramaic.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to translate that into new languages that exist through the century. Yeah, just your run-of-the-mill,
Yeah, we pretty much got it down first try, and so we just
he
passed
said,
that
she
down.
said, and I don't know, even know why we put it in a binding in the first place, man.
Pretty simple. This Greek word means this. This one means this. This one means this. This one, and you just do that for the entire thing.
Because we wanted to. That's why. No, it is like Mike, Moody and Graduate, and you still touch on it again because you can't say enough about it. A little bit, at least in your PhD studies, where it's like we've done whole courses, semesters long, 14, 16 weeks, and it's like you guys are at the end. It's like you guys are going to have to do more research. This is going to be an ongoing thing. But hey, hopefully this gives you the tools to get started. And I'm like, I just sat through a whole semester, so now I can get started? Are you kidding me?
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
I remember one of the classes that's really stuck in my head was this lecture. And he had a phenomenal PowerPoint, and I swear to this day I wish I asked him for it. I wish I took pictures. I wish I took more in-depth notes. But I have had to go back and do the research myself and have to try and unpack everything that I learned and uncover what I lost, right? Because what do they say? You absorb 15 to 20% of the class or something like that. So
Oh no.
you
I
don't
think.
soak in the majority of the information.
Oh
Um,
no. My numbers are definitely lower. Oh no.
well, it's funny too, because like our our grading system is the hardest in the world.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess we're
No
doing better.
biggie. Oh, you
But
mean you got an A plus plus to get a B plus? Oh, cool. Cool,
yeah.
cool. Whatever.
But this class was actually the one that stuck in my head the most. One of them, and it's because of how important it was. Like
Agreed.
it is
It
important
is.
to know how we get our Bible. Really the lineage that took it down. Because Dave, I don't know if you've
And they're
been needing to get
skeptics.
into this or if you got into this conversation before, but like Muslims theology, they
Right, right.
say their Bible, their Quran is the exact words that were handed down, right, from
Yeah,
Allah,
yeah. World truth. Yeah.
that Muhammad, brought out, and it's never been changed. So their Arabic is, according to them, like the autographs, the original writing. Not one jot,
Right,
not one tittle, not one pen stroke, not even a little bit of ink dot has changed.
right, right.
That is a high
That's a bold
claim.
claim. Yeah,
Yeah, and
that ain't no pithy statement.
that's a high standard to keep. We as Christians, we don't take that stance. We
Which
take
is
a
also a bold. That's also a bold move.
right. I
Just
mean,
different. Yeah.
our view is, what Paul originally wrote down, that's inspired, right? And so how faithful we can be to that written word is what's inspired. And so we pour over a lot of manuscripts and translations and things. One guy might have written something down wrong, but with the majority of manuscripts, we can see that person did. And so we don't have problems with, a jot or a tittle being off, because we see that it is off, and then we know what it originally meant, and so we don't have the conundrum that Muslims do, right?
Right. True.
So
And
yeah,
yeah, well, yeah, and why we have like or even just like, or like the Book of Mormon, or just any other books where it's
mm-hmm,
just like, how do you know you're true? And like, and we have skeptics, right? This is a relevant conversation because even if it's not in church, but you might have family members, or you might be confronted with some deconstructionist on TikTok. That's why we talked about that's like the Bible's full of contradictions.
mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, you see some of the debates, and it's like, well, just name one. Well, there's hundreds. I just want you to name one. But it's like, but there are people that do try to like take great pains to see all the inconsistencies.
Right.
I'd say they're paradoxes, but whatever. Um, but there are people that say the Bible's full of contradictions,
Mm-hmm.
or hey, it was written by men. Men make mistakes, which is true. Men do make mistakes.
Right.
I'm trusting that these men didn't because of the Holy Spirit. Uh, it does take faith, the same amount of faith it does when you read any other book from a scholar and you hope they're right.
Yeah.
but um, but it is a topic of conversation, is relevance, because if you haven't encountered it already, you either will or someone will, and
Mm-hmm.
you can be a voice of reason in their life. We're like, hey, actually, you don't need to be intimidated by it. This is
Yeah.
how we look. Hey, this is the historicity, not just of certain books, but the whole Bible. This is how we got it. This is why we stay away from that book, like that
Mm-hmm.
translation. This is why we prefer maybe these couple. Um, because just because someone translated the Bible doesn't mean they're right. That's like, I don't know
Yeah.
about you. Like when I see a new translation comes out and I'm like, well, let me read it.
Yeah. I wonder what they did. I wonder how this is any different. Because you have to be different for it to be a different translation. Otherwise, you're doing copyright infringement. So it's like,
Yeah.
what's this
Well, and
translation
that
trying to
was
bring out?
right. And that's why we had our hermeneutics classes. They
Mm-hmm.
literally made us compare translations.
Yeah.
Like, well, why did they draw that out? But why didn't they draw this out? It's like, is one, like, it's not like, is one better or worse? It's just which one's more accurate?
Right.
Or are they both accurate and different? Yeah, that's why we
Yeah.
need to talk about this, folks.
in and folks, we are not afraid of variations. I mean, you're going to see a bit of why that is. And as I
I'm
said,
thankful for them. Like, I
inspiration,
love it.
what is God's word is what is true to the original text. And that's a lot harder since we speak English, not, Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, or any of that. We're on pretty good firm foundations. We're on good grounds. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys my slides for class. So forgive me.
Oh, is that
It's
Paul writing the
compiled.
KJV? I'm sorry.
It
I'm
is
sorry.
it is not. It is definitely AI. I actually chose this one. You're gonna laugh, Dave, because he looked
Oh,
like Jared Leto to me.
oh, that would be so sick. Wouldn't that be? Oh, Jared Leto, please become a Christian and become a Bible scholar in
That
linguistics and
that
all that
that
cool
would be
jazz,
what he
man.
looks
Come
like.
on.
So, all
Oh
right.
gosh, way better than Morpheus or Morbius, whatever it was.
I like
That'd be
that
way
movie.
cooler. 30
It
seconds
would
to
be cool to
Mars? How
see
about
him as
30
like
seconds
Paul or
to...
something, you know?
Mm-mm.
All right. All right.
It's so
Let's
cool.
jump in here real quick. I'm gonna lay down a quick foundation. All right, guys. Oh, it didn't change.
How Pauline of you. I'm
So,
sorry. I'm sorry.
straight off the bat, and please ignore the systematic theology. That was for a different class. I'm borrowing my own slides for a different class. um,
Oh,
but yeah, so the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. I mean, we all know that. One thing that some people don't realize is that Daniel is actually written, so parts of Daniel, um, I should say most of Daniel actually. Parts of it are written in Hebrew, but most of Daniel's written in Aramaic. And then when we get towards the New Testament, coming up around the time of the New Testament, um, there was a group of 72 Jewish scholars uh, who were sent to Alexandria by the Jerusalem aristocracy, and their purpose was to translate the Old Testament into Greek. So we have a Greek translation of Scripture up to just before the time of Christ, essentially, which is the entire Old Testament. And this got called the Septuagint, which is abbreviated if you read it in any commentaries or anything like that as LXX, which comes out to about 70.
yeah. Roman numerals.
Septuagint
Let's go.
also refers to 70 because it's the translation of the 70 Jewish scholars that it took to bring this forward. So we have the Septuagint, and this is really important because, folks, the apostles, the disciples, the writers of the New Testament regularly quote from the Septuagint rather than the Hebrew. They do choose when and where, but the Septuagint seems to be the favored one. Um, so
Is
that's
that bad? Are they being bad boys?
no,
Oh
but
no.
it is important, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when we're doing research or when we're looking into a passage, you might notice this. A commentary might bring this out, and also it's kind of cool because you see here, you know, they're reading their Bible in the Greek, and so many times I'll read from a commentary or something that, oh, this author could not have written this epistle because he didn't know Greek. Um, he does know Greek. He's A lot of them are reading Greek for their Bible, in on top of, they're in the marketplace
I'm
having
sorry,
to
they're
think
only
English.
occupied by Rome, but whatever.
Exactly.
They don't need to survive.
So the
Oh my
Septuagint
god.
is a huge thing. So we
Heck
have
yeah.
now the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek Old Testament. So moving into the New Testament, we have the Greek New Testament, right? So now they're writing, and so you
In a
have the
language they don't know, by the way. Oh, oops.
right. So you now have essentially the entire Bible. That's where we're at. You have the Hebrew, the Aramaic in Daniel, and then the Greek. But you also have what is essentially the entire Bible in Greek. Once the Greek New Testament's complete, you have the Old and the New in Greek. So that's where we're at. Now, following after Acts, we can see that there's a spread of the gospel. Remember, you know, Philip talked to the Ethiopian eunuch. That eunuch had a copy of the Bible, was trying to read it, wasn't fully understanding it. But where does he go back to? He goes back to his hometown. So now he's going to spread that gospel over there. So there's a spreading of the gospel that happens. In from this, we get a couple more different languages of our gospels. We have a different languages now. And so in the West, you have Latin. And we'll cover that there in a sec. In the South, in Egypt, Alexandria, you have Coptic, which is just Egyptian. Just think of that as Egyptian. And then in East Turkey, you have Greek. So we have a couple more translations, but this is coming kind of out of Acts as the gospel spreading out. But this Latin translation doesn't really come until the 4th century with Jerome. Now, Dave, we both know Jerome.
Yeah. I know a couple Jeromes. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Dude, Jerome, what a guy.
Jerome is a Greek scholar.
Yeah.
He's
Writing in Latin.
So he's a Greek scholar, and he is tasked by the emperor, by the king, to create a translation into Latin. The thing is, Latin isn't really the most accessible language. It's actually a language that isn't used often at all. It's used in like Roman circles. It's used in, amongst senators when it's pertaining to like legal matters. It's used amongst the aristocracy. It really has a very niche, high end, like upper class.
It just doesn't work. It's going to Brazil and translating it into Mandarin.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what? We don't even speak that. Like,
so Latin wasn't even used that much. It was understood at the time,
really.
but not by everyone, and in very specific high up scenarios. And I think that's why they wanted it translated into Latin to sort of give that veneration to it, right? And so instead of it in the Greek, they wanted it in a more beautiful language. So Jerome actually opposed this. He did not want it in Latin because he had the Greek. So he didn't like this at all, but because he was nicely voluntold by the emperor, which is in
who's the emperor?
Yeah, which isn't the person you typically say no to.
You don't really. Yeah. Well, it's so nice to be American. Like, I don't know if I like that. That didn't really work that way back then.
Right. So, against his wishes, he translated the Greek into Latin, which became known as the Latin Vulgate. There's a little picture right there. So,
wow.
There we go. We have a few languages already there. We're here at about 300 AD. They were in the 4th century, and it's already changing.
Well, because you have to think, like, even if you take like a later date, let's think as late as you can for like Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
Like John would have finished it maybe right at 98, 99, 97. Yep. So we're talking like, I know it sounds like it's 300 years. A lot can happen in 300 years, but at the same time, when you're thinking about a consolidated group of people, they're going to be. I mean, America, is going to be, we're 50 years away from it being 300 years old, and we all still speak English.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's put into perspective. It's like, oh, it's 300 years, and they're still only speaking, Greek or Latin. It's like, well, why would we change?
Yeah.
Like, if that's how everyone talks.
But it is like a radical amount.
It's a revolution.
Yeah, because you have now Latin. You also have Coptic. You have
Hmm.
that Greek, you have the Greek translations as well of
Yeah,
the
it's
Hebrew.
spreading.
So it's moving here. The thing is, at this point in time, it pretty much comes to a standstill.
Yeah, it really does. Like,
hmm
like
So,
really does.
folks, I actually want to ask you guys on the air in real time here. How long do you think it is before we get any major translation?
Yeah,
Because here we are in the fourth century, and I'm
it's
gonna
like
go ahead and answer that for you now.
wait, do a hint. Like a hint. It's more than 100 years.
Yeah,
It's like
it's
way more.
it's more than 10 years.
You said more than 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh.
It is about 1,000 years later.
Sorry, Bible nerds over here. We're like, told you.
It it stays in Latin for such a long time. The Latin Vulgate becomes the rock by which everyone is reading from. The Catholic Church, which becomes the dominant force there, is doing Latin Mass, right? Even till today, there are many Catholics which subscribe that the Mass, that is their Sunday service, should be Latin only.
Yep,
Isn't that crazy, Dave?
it is. I think. Um. Yeah, and I'm like, you know what? If nothing else, Martin Luther did do something in the Catholic Church because it's in English now,
Yeah,
or Italian, or you know what I mean. It's allowed to be in other languages
right.
now. So
Yeah.
he did something.
So I mean, there are Catholics out there that
Definitely.
believe that. What's funny about it too is if you ask them, like, do you understand it? They would say no. So they want it
Because they
in
don't really
Latin.
care.
The
Like,
tradition is in Latin. They think it sounds more beautiful in Latin, but they don't know what's being said. This is Dave, this is the only time that the
ugh,
preacher is speaking in tongues. And
yeah. Someone needs to be interpreting. Like, I'm
right.
just like, you know what I mean? I'm like, please, this is not building up. Okay. I'm like,
Right.
I'm like, he could have said he could have ordered something from McDonald's and he said it in Latin. Like, how am I gonna know? Like,
That's a funny thing too, because
like
that becomes the thrust for people wanting an English
right,
translation.
right.
So, okay, let's get back to this. 1,000 years later, John Wycliffe produces the first English Bible, and we have a little picture there.
Yes.
But he translates it from the Latin Vulgate. So he's translating from Latin. Remember, Jerome from the Greek. So
Original.
yeah, from the original Greek to the Latin, Wycliffe from the Latin to English. And he wants to preserve the feel of the Latin. So he even preserves
Mm.
like the Latin phrases and like sort of the way that Latin has is structured. He tries to preserve some of that.
Wouldn't
So,
wouldn't that like make that like a transmission then though? Not a translation? Not
hmm,
trying to sorry, this is off the cuff, sorry folks. Would that make that a transmission and not a translation?
do you want to define that for our viewers?
No, I asked you. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, I mean, I can. Because I mean, a simple definition, I think a translation is when you're in any, whatever you're translating, you're looking at the original text of a document or saying, and then you're translating it word for word, concept for concept. That's an idea that's going to come up later. You're looking at the original text and you're trying to translate it to the using the best equivalent terms in the language that you're trying to translate it into.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then I would say a transmission. It's almost like you have a middleman, where it's like, no, 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 I'm not translating from the original language. It's like I'm almost translating from a translation,
It's like a
as
second hand.
opposed to it's like secondhand,
Yeah.
exactly where it's like, oh, I'm not looking at the Greek originally and then going to English. It's like, oh, I'm looking at the Greek seeing a Spanish translation, and now I'm translating from Spanish into English. And
Yep.
it's like, well, maybe the Spanish word they used into English is not really as close of an equivalent as if I did like a Greek to English. And
Hmm.
so now you can kind of see where it's like, I like what he was trying to do. He's
Yeah.
like, he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. But it just might not be that accurate. Huh.
Yeah, and we got to remember, like Latin, it's been around for 1,000 years. So at this point, it's sort of viewed like God's language. It's like the heavenly language. If I can be so like, I want
Ooh,
to say it's a little
heaven.
bit hyperbolic, a little bit of
No,
an exaggeration,
yeah.
but it's also
It's
kind of
aesthetically
not.
pleasing. Yeah,
Yeah,
it sounds
like
well, especially when you sing it too. It
there
sounds
are yeah, there's sort of that mindset that almost follows from that as well. So it's not too hyperbolic, it's not too exaggerating, but it does convey a little bit of the feeling behind it. And so he really tries to preserve some of the Latin phrases in Latin isms, the way that it sounds
right.
within his English translation. So moving from there, people did not take too well to his translating.
Well, forbidden. That's a pretty strong word.
I mean, remember,
Uh,
everyone wanted it in Latin, and now it's in English, right?
now
And so
anyone can read it. Ugh.
it's sort of like you have an English translation, and then you have it translated into like Gen Z slang.
Mm. And it's like not everyone could read, by the way, but still,
Yeah.
whatever.
So it's like, well, it's so much worse now, right? So that's kind of how the church felt, but even worse because it's like, oh, this is the heavenly language. You just brought it way down, So they wanted to kill this guy. In fact, they did kill him. Wycliffe was
Yeah.
burned at the stake, and then on top of that, here's the pettiness: they threw his ashes in the river.
Gosh.
So, um,
Oh my.
they didn't
Not out of reverence, by the way. It
yeah.
wasn't reverence. It was like spread them everywhere.
So 1408, English Bible's forbidden. Now, unfortunately for them, an invention would be right on the edge of coming, and that is Johannes Gutenberg inventing the Gutenberg press, the
Yes.
printing press, the way that they will be able to make mass copies of things rather than handwriting everything. And so
Nice.
we now have the Gutenberg press, and 15 years later, we would have the Gutenberg Bible, right? And that's mass distributed. Of course, that also, it's still forbidden, so he had to try and hide those in carts of hay and other things to get them to people.
So cool.
It was sort of like a speakeasy, It's like, hey, you got the
Yeah.
goods? Like, yeah, I got myself a Bible. It's like, I
Dude,
keep
yeah.
it I keep it wrapped in leather and then hidden up in my chimney, because it's like,
Let's go. Breaking the law. Let's go. I
yeah.
love it. I
So
love breaking the law. I just want to do it for Jesus.
the rebels that we
Yeah,
were.
man. Don't be always be a rebel. Just
So here we are, 1455. We have the Gutenberg Bibles. We're pretty much here at the 1450s, almost at the 1500s. And this is at the point where I actually have to kind of pause here, Dave, and I have to talk about what textual families are. And we sort of
ooh,
already talked about one. We talked
we
about
did.
the Latin Vulgate. And folks, here's what I mean by textual family. What the source material is that someone bases their translations off of. So we saw that with Jerome, he produces the Latin Vulgate. There will be translations, English translations that are based off of the Latin Vulgate. John Wycliffe's, uh, the Gutenberg Bible is another one of those. But coming just around the corner in the 1500s is a different textual family that is called the Textus Receptus. And this family is essentially using 12 Greek manuscripts. So we're getting back to the Greek, except at this point in time, we don't have a lot of Greek manuscripts discovered because people aren't really getting into textual criticism. They're not getting into, the juice of like, hey, let's try and go back to the original writing, and they're not doing
Right.
archaeology, right? Because
No, well, because stuff was being destroyed or it's
hmm
buried over because it's centuries, right?
yep,
They're like it's the 1500s, and like the Latin Vulgate was 400
yep.
CE, and then it's like, yeah, yeah, it's a lot of time for a lot of dirt to
Yeah.
accumulate.
And then on top of that, like people don't even know Latin, let alone Greek. So, I mean, there's probably a handful of people that could even read the Greek. So, it's not super popular, and there isn't a lot of manuscripts that they have. We do have a lot. Spoiler alert, we have 5,600 today. So we have a lot of Greek manuscripts, which means we are able to do textual criticism very well. What that means is we're able to take all our manuscripts and kind of work backwards towards the original. Um,
And more than any other religion, by the way.
yeah, it,
I don't
it
mind
blows
flexing.
everything out of the
I
water.
don't mind it. I love it.
The problem is, folks, we can't
Keep up.
dive too deeply into this because that's a whole different episode in and of itself.
Oh gosh,
So we have to
just
sort of try
defining
and fly
extant would
by
be 10
over these
minutes.
comments. But all this to say is, coming back to this, the Textus Receptus is using Greek. We're now moving back to Greek, which is phenomenal.
Gee.
We just don't have a lot of Greek manuscripts that we're working from. That's in contrast to where we're at today in our relatively recent, which is a different textual family called the critical text. And that's us just trying to take every manuscript and produce the best translation from that. So it's fairly modern, and it
Very
kind of
eclectic.
at this point replaces the other textual families. But if we go back to it, let's just remember we have the Latin Vulgate, and the Textus Receptus is coming in here at the 1500s. So from here on, we're going to start moving into people translating from the Textus Receptus, the 12 Greek manuscripts. And the
Which
first
is
one
so
to do
great.
it is William Tyndale and his Tyndale Bible in 1526. So folks, that's 70 years later from our previous translation, the Gutenberg Bible. So Wycliffe produces the first English
English.
translation, not from the Latin, but from the Greek. Um, so I really love this. This is the heart of Tyndale. You can see he's such a rebel from the Catholic Church and the Latin view. He says, "If God spare my life ere many years, I will cause a boy who drives the plow to know more scriptures than you do." And he was talking to another priest and bishop and stuff.
Which
Um,
that's so great. Well, like even like because you had Luther. Luther was 9 years before that.
mhm.
Like you think like this is like we're kind of also like there's like that reformer flavor, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, you know what? You're not elite. You're not special. I'm gonna make sure everybody knows what God thinks.
Yep.
It's like
Part of the
so
heart behind
awesome.
this too is because, guys, remember, even with these English Bibles coming out, they're really hard to get their hands on. I mean, you're still
It's not
hiding them.
Amazon.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you're
no
still
Amazon.
hiding them so you can have one. If you can even afford one, if you can somehow get your hands on one, they're extremely rare. And if you get caught with one, you're probably going to get killed. So they're very, very rare. But people like Wycliffe, people like Tyndale, people like Gutenberg, they're all trying to get Bibles out, but it's a really difficult process.
Oh,
So
it's so great though. They're like, I don't care though. It's like awesome. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
it's that
This,
rebel spirit. But hey, all this to say is like you're going to church, you're still only hearing Latin. And the
yeah.
the crazy thing about that is not everyone knows Latin. And I mean people preaching as well. So at this point in time, a lot of fathers were preaching Latin, as in they were reading the words, but they didn't even know how to read them properly, and they didn't even know what they meant. They were just reading it, right? I mean, your best guess is as good as theirs. So that's why
I'm
um
sorry. It's like a southerner speaking Spanish, man. Like, ¿Cuál es tu color favorito?
exactly. No understanding of what it is, and
Like,
probably pronouncing it wrong, which is why
oof,
Tyndale is so hardcore in that quote. If God spares my
fragile.
life all these years, I will cause a boy who drives a plow to know more scriptures than you do. Because you don't even know what you're reading.
Bro, let's go.
Crazy. So we
Oh,
have our
oh,
first
so
English
good.
translation from the Greek, no longer from the Latin, and it's Tyndale in 1526.
Mm.
That was just an absolute bulwark right there, 1526. Now, a few years later, in 1539, King Henry is going to pass an edict in favor of English Bibles. So now it's no longer illegal, right? Which is fantastic. This is going to pave the way for the Geneva Bible in 1560, which is going to be the first Latin letter English Bible. Oh, are we going back to the Latin? No, 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 no. The way
What?
that you read right now, the way that your alphabet looks, right, when it's printed and in type, is what's called a Latin letter. The form in which you read our English is Latin letters.
Why
Um,
an A looks like an A.
yeah,
Sorry. You know what I mean?
exactly.
Like, that's why a B looks like a B.
It doesn't look like an Arabic or anything like that because those are
Right.
Arabic letters. Latin letters are what we think of today when we see our alphabet. And so this is the Geneva Bible is the first Latin letter English, um, which is huge and
Yay.
becomes extremely popular. It even has study notes. So in some sense, this is the first
For
study Bible.
study Bible. Let's go.
Yep. And so people are not only getting the word, but they're able to dive into it. So the Geneva Bible, huge, extremely popular. I've heard it said that if you came across to the Americas, you had two things with you. Two things that essentially everyone owned. It was a Geneva Bible and it was Pilgrim's Progress. Two
Yeah.
things every family owned. Not the King
Yeah.
James. It's actually
Bangers.
the Geneva Bible. But as I just said, going into it, I just tipped off to it comes the 1611 King
Yeah.
James version.
I think, yeah, I think Calvin would have been mad. Well, and he was in Geneva. So that's the best
Mhm.
part. John
Yeah.
Calvin, I'm pretty, actually, that's the fun part. He knew Greek, like, not because he was against, like, oh, he wasn't trying to keep anything, right? He just wanted to know the originals for himself, you
hmm
know? And so he knew Latin because he just wanted to be well rounded. Where it's like, I just love that you have the Geneva Bible, and then you have like John Calvin. It's like, ha ha, I'm one of the few countries where everyone's trying to come because Christianity is cool here and not Catholicism, like at least Protestantism, you know, not like yeah, you're not Catholic, you're not going to die here for being a Protestant. It's like America before America, really. It's great. um, and but then yeah, the ominous, you know, very
Yeah.
ominous bomb.
So
Like
we just tipped off.
1611.
Yeah, we just tipped off to it. We had the Geneva Bible, and then we move into the 1600s. We go from this
We
is
had a good run.
I'm doing the math now. It's 51 years later.
Nice.
King James tasks a committee of 54 scholars to produce a translation. And because it's King James that is asking for this and tasking this, this is an authorized Bible, right? So these 54 scholars go from the Greek, that is the Textus Receptus, these 12 Greek manuscripts, and they produce the King James Version of 1611, which is why a King James, the KJV, also has the nickname the Authorized Version. It's important to know, guys, because that's sort of a nickname for the King James Version, and that's going to make a lot more sense as we move into here. Now, folks, pay close attention.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
I'm not trying to get ahead.
oh,
Sorry.
no,
I
no.
hate when they go authorized. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
We'll
because
get
they think
there.
it's
We'll
still
get
like
there.
authorized as in authority from God. And it's not.
Yeah,
It's
it's
authority.
not.
It's actually authority from man.
Yeah. Like, I'm not trying to be like funny. Like they didn't have Crossway. We have Crossway now, right? And
Hmm.
Crossway authorized people to be able to translate the ESV.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, am I going to go, oh, ESV, that's authorized well, authorized by Crossway, but like not like not it's not like the authorized version is the Hebrew, sometimes Aramaic and Daniel, and Greek. Like if
Hmm.
you want God authorized, but this is just like him saying, I want you to make a translation for me. Like,
Pretty much.
well, okay,
Yeah.
well, just like how the emperor for Jerome authorized him to write the Latin Vulgate.
Hmm.
That's how you need to think of it, essentially.
Yeah. In the King
I
James
mean, it's a little
version.
different because of the power plays, but
Yeah, the King James version wasn't perfect at the time, and it's coming out of 1611. Scholars know there are things that happened with the KJV. There's written in lines because of the politics of the day. There's a famous Trinitarian verse that's not in the Bible that was inserted by the King James version. To try and affirm the Trinity more explicitly. Now, everyone knows about this, and we take it out in our Bible, so it's not in anything other than maybe the King James version. Uh,
yeah,
KJV people sometimes accuse Christians of having Bibles that omit that. I mean, take that out. But it's just a bare fact that we know as historians and looking at the original Greek manuscripts and all the manuscripts that we have, that we know that that was put in and actually put in for specific reasons. There's even things like written in the margins that kind of allude to, the Pope being the Antichrist and stuff. So there's some things that are part of the King James that are a bit extra that shouldn't be
yeah.
there.
It's like
So let
modifying a car, you know? It's like that car it did not have a twin turbo engine. Okay? And you can't yell at me for having a stock car and be like, "Oh, you have the wrong car.
Yeah, you didn't even.
That's not the same make and model."
Yeah,
It's
your
like,
your
yes it
car,
is.
your car, you changed the engine because it's not turbocharged. It's like actually this is how it comes out of the
This is
factory.
stock. This is the stock. So like, so all the mechanics, all you car lovers, I tried to do a new illustration where like that's what it is. Like, hey, this is the stock translation,
Right.
Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek. Okay, and you're trying to have a fun KJV, you know, Fast and Furious version. Okay, you got to chill out, fam.
Yeah. All right. So folks, this is the slide. I have to give a little bit of a disclaimer that here. You're probably going to want to take a photo of this slide or something.
You're allowed.
This is the one that I had to do a lot of research into. It's not perfect because I am not infallible and I am not inerrant. I do err, but this is what I've come to find out in my studies, and I developed a sort of tree to make things easier to see. And so you guys are welcome to see this and enjoy this. Enjoy the
And it's
fruits
in
of my
Latin,
labor.
and it's not in English.
But
Sorry.
I think this will help you guys understand our translations now and where a lot of them come from. All right, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and look at this. So from the King James version, they revised it, right? There needed some revisions. So in 1881, some like 200 years later, 200 plus years later, we have the revised version. Okay, so from the KJV, they revised it, so now it's the revised version. But then, like 20 years later, we have the American Standard Version, and that's coming out of the RV. So
America.
the KJV has been revised and updated to be a little bit more faithful. And then they've revised it again 20 years later, and now it's the American Standard Version, right?
Right.
Yeah, we
And are
still have,
these new translations? Or are they just like, hey, they're not using Greek or Hebrew, right? They're just
no,
like,
they're just revisions of the text.
right.
Maybe some corrections, but these are all essentially updating.
Yeah. Yeah.
From this, 50 years later, 51 years later, we have the revised standard version.
Oh
So
my gosh.
so we
Wait,
have
don't you?
the,
Sorry. Wait, I'm just trying to make sense of like, so the revised standard's really like the fourth revision, though.
exactly.
Oh gosh, thank you.
I'm
I just want to
gonna,
make sure I'm processing. I like, we've done this, but like, I still can't wrap my head around it sometimes. It's
yeah. Well, it's just funny because you can see the sort of the authorized version, the
right.
revised version, the American Standard Version, the revised Standard Version,
Oh my
and then
gosh.
in 1982, so now we're 30 years later, we need to take out the these, the thous, and bring it more to a contemporary reading so it reads normally rather than like Shakespeare. And so we have the new King James Version. So we kind of loop back to the original thing that we called it. And so we've gone through all these different revisions of it. Um, and so you have that history of revisions and translations of the King James Version. Now, you may
Wow.
notice that there's two little tree branches going off to the side.
Some
Now, the
squiggles.
American Standard Version becomes sort of a skeleton key for other translations. The Living Bible is a paraphrase, not a translation, but it paraphrases off of the ASV, the American Standard Version.
Hmm.
The NASB utilizes the ASV, the American Standard Version, for its translation and is very like a very wooden translation. And what we mean by that is it is trying to be as faithful as this Greek word follows this. So it's off the back of the ASV, and we have a very, very almost like literal translation with the NASB. But you can see the New American Standard Bible, the American Standard Version. See, you can see even from the naming convention that like it's all flowing together here.
Yeah.
There's just one other thing I want to point out here. The ESV in 2001, there at the bottom right corner, uses the RSV, the Revised Standard Version from 1952. It uses that as a skeleton foundation for its translation. So that's kind of why I put a little dotted line. It's going to use the Revised Standard Version to essentially have the entire scripture, so it doesn't work from scratch, because that's a very difficult thing to do. So it's going to use that, and then it's going to go back through the Greek, through the critical text, that new textual family, and then it's going to change anything if it differs from the Greek or the Hebrew or any of the critical text. And so it's using it as a foundation, and then it's changing it along the way as they deem this text actually wasn't translated properly. So the ESV is sort of related to the KJV family tree, but only insofar as it just used it to kind of set a bedrock to work off of. With that being said, we have a couple more: the NLT, HCSB, and the CSB, as it is now. Those are just translations in and of themselves. They don't use anything. They go back to the Greek and the Hebrew. So
Yeah.
those are unrelated to the King James. But this slide sort of gives you a good understanding of how many of our translations are actually just based off of the King James Version, and where a lot of these newer translations come from.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like the I mean, I preach from the ESV, and for some folks, it's a little bit more difficult. Like, I love preaching from it. It might not always be everyone's favorite just to read, like just to read kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I love preaching from it, and it's interesting. Like, it's like I'm not trying to be this way, but it's almost like the ESV. did the work that the KJ I wish the KJV had done all along. I
Yeah.
know that there's a different reason for why it was authorized. King James had an agenda, and not all agendas are bad, but I'm just saying where it's like the ESV fact checks the KJV, and the KJV like wasn't necessarily always worried about that all the time.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's like one of those things where the ESV is like, yeah, hey, you know what? Like, hey, this is where like I'm fact checking the KJV against the Greek. This is where the KJV gets it right. Hey, why reinvent the wheel? But
Yeah.
it's like, oh, but why did they add this? Or why did they omit this? It's like, well, the Greek didn't do that, and so that's where we're going to have to, disagree.
Exactly.
And I do love that. Because and also if you look at the ESV, it it's 23 years old as of right now, 2001, like 9/11.
Hmm.
Like it's a relatively well, considering like how much time has gone, it's a
Yeah.
new translation.
Hmm.
Uh, and so it's like one of those things sometimes where it's like they don't have to totally reinvent the wheel. It's like, but it's almost they're going back to the old school way a little bit, even though it's newer. It's like you like have a favorite band and they have like their first studio album,
Yeah.
and then technology changes, and so they can remaster it with like the new technology,
Hmm.
and then it's like 30 years, 40 years later, and that's when they like release like the demo tapes of like this is us in our garage before it ever made it to studio, and it
Yeah.
sounds like totally different, right?
Hmm.
And it's like, well, it sounds kind of like the song that everybody knows, but then like nothing like it, right?
Yeah.
um and it's like the ESV is like, hey, like, this is what everyone's like going to. That's why even some people are like KJV only, because they're just thinking of it's got a little bit of history on its side, long
Hmm.
standing, it's authorized, you use all the trigger terms. And then you're like, you have the folks who are like, well, I like the RSV or the New King James. And it's like, okay, you like the vamped up, on Mountain Dew version.
Yeah.
Uh, and then it's like, I like try to be like, I love being like the ESV guy that says like, hey, I'm not saying you stop listening to that band, and I'm not saying that you don't appreciate the music that they've written, but I'm like, this was it. This is like when it was, in its chrysalis form, when they
Yeah.
were just like when they were just putting it together, like as original as you can get. And
Yeah.
that's, sorry, that was like a long drawn out illustration. And I love music,
It's a good one too, because
but
I mean, I always said like I love the ESV, and you're right. It's been over 20 years now, and it's still the go-to when it comes to seminaries and higher academics.
it
And
really
it's
is. Like
either
everybody
ESV
uses
or NASB, but I've even seen people, a lot of professors prefer the ESV. Um,
it. Heck
so
yeah.
it's just a
It's
really
just
good translation because it fixes a lot that was wrong in the King James family tree, because it's going back to the original Greek. It's not
yeah.
just using 12 manuscripts, it's using all the manuscripts. And we know that we've uncovered, because of archaeology, things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, but also just a massive amount of Greek manuscripts. And some are far better and far earlier than the 12 that were originally used for the Textus Receptus. So we're able to actually fine tune a lot more what the text should say. And and then even on top of that, our knowledge of Koine Greek, that is the Greek of the time of Christ, we've really grown in our understanding of that Greek. I mean, we are still unlocking further and further understanding of Koine Greek. But we're here at a wonderful time in which we have never had more Greek manuscripts, and we've never understood Greek more
Yeah.
than now. And the ESV is actually using that privilege, that technology, to develop this translation. And so, I mean, the King James version is grandpa, and the ESV is the progenitor. It is the grandson that gets to benefit off of all the hard work Grandpa did.
Oh my gosh.
So
Times are changing, old man. I, I don't, I just think, well, I don't know if we're going to get it really does balance also like the idea of word for word and thought for thought
yeah, I
as well.
didn't put that
I
in the
love balance
slides, but I
as
think
much as
I
you
think we
can.
have a little bit of time to be able to get into that.
Just
If
nothing
you want to.
crazy, but just like at least like what we even mean, where it's like you could have someone that's like, okay, especially let me just caveat, it's language, right?
Right.
And so like I pity I really do. I pity the person that is trying to learn English as their second language because it is such a hard language to learn.
Hmm.
Like I mean, poor people, like you. I'm sorry, you poor souls. Like the fact that we have a book called a thesaurus, okay, where you have a dictionary where if you looked up all those words in a dictionary, they all mean something different. But if you look them up in a thesaurus, you're putting all the 20 words together or
Right.
something because they, even if they don't mean the same thing, they are so incredibly similar. And so it's uh it's one of the blessings and one of the curses of when you're doing Bible translation
Hmm.
sometimes because like if you're doing word for word as opposed to thought for thought because
Yeah.
sometimes you can still convey what the passage means, even if you don't necessarily use the exact same words or like literally the next logical equivalent.
Yeah.
And that's
And I
he's
have a
pulling up
slide
the
here
slide.
for you for that.
Oh, cool.
There's
There you go.
different ways to translate something, and as Dave just said, there's word for word. What's in parentheses is the academic phrase
Right.
for it, the formal equivalence. We're just going to call it word for word. There's also thought for thought. It's called the dynamic equivalent for the academics. It's just thought for thought. It's honestly, I even in academia, I
We
don't
still
really
use,
encounter
yeah.
people that use those academic terms. We use it though when we have to write articles and papers and stuff. We do have to write that. But when you're talking, we're all saying word for word, thought for thought. And then finally, the last one is a paraphrase. And we all know what a paraphrase is. When someone quotes something or does this long monologue in Shakespeare, and you're like, he essentially said, I'd rather die. Right? I mean, that's a very short paraphrase
I
of a
mean, that's a
long
quick
monologue.
summary, but like,
Yeah,
yeah.
but it's a paraphrase. It really captures the essence of what's being said. And so a paraphrase will try and read the sentence or maybe the couple sentence and then restate that in a easier to understand way. So it's sort of a restating, but it's still
Yeah.
trying to be faithful to the text as much as
Yeah.
possible.
Well, and it can still be helpful. You just have to know in your head that this is not necessarily like, necessarily even, and it can be from the original text,
Right.
but it's like, it's usually going from like English and it's like, this is what he said, but if you get nothing else, like we do that on our sermons all the time. Hey,
Hmm.
I said a lot of stuff today, but like if this is the only thing you take away from the sermon, it's blank. you know?
Yeah.
That's a paraphrase of our sermons, not a
Right.
text. But hopefully that helps you understand.
Yeah,
But
and if you guys want to see something very visual of what that is, I'll just include this slide as well, and I'll try and cover this real quick.
oh, there you go. That's we should have pulled this up first. This is
If we were to take First Peter 1:13, the
yeah.
Greek says,
Read
Dave,
it.
do you want to read that?
Sure. Dio anexongmenoi tas osfuos tes dianoias. Oh,
Yeah,
dianoias.
yeah.
I'm trying to do the doi. It's not even a diphthong. That's three vowels.
Well, it's funny too because
Dianoias. Sorry.
I only say that because Dave, you actually read Greek out loud better than I do. Like
Sorry.
I
That was like it's 11:40 and I'm like trying.
No, you read it way better than I do because I really simplify the way to do it. I pronounce Greek like
English.
Midwesterner pronounces Spanish foods like
Oh no.
tortillas, right? Like
Tortilla.
I read Greek that way. I know what it says. I know how to look it up. I know how to
Yeah.
translate it. I know how to study with it, but don't ask me to pronounce it.
Hey man, that's how you speak a dead language right there.
Right? Just got to get you on that Latin, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we do. Well, okay. Is this okay? Sorry, sidebar. Very sorry.
Hmm.
The idea that we moved from the Latin to the 12 manuscripts, Greek manuscripts, but then we titled it Textus Receptus. Can I just point out the irony?
Yeah, right. Actually, that's such a good point. I don't know
I'm
why I
sorry. Can
never
I just
thought
say
of
that like
that.
we're
We're
moving
still
from the Latin,
using
but we gave it a
Latin.
Latin title? Okay, sorry. I'm not.
Oh my goodness.
It's been bothering me the whole time, but I didn't know when to bring it up.
That's so funny. I didn't
I'm
even.
so sorry.
I'm not gonna sleep at night now.
I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, thoughts that live in my
Yeah.
mind rent free.
Well, actually, you just brought something up that reminded me of something that we just glossed over. I in prepping for some of this, I came across this website that is like essentially an apologetic for the King James version,
Cool.
and it said like, did you, did the King James version only use 12 Greek manuscripts, right? And I was like, okay, what do they have to say about that? And
Right,
it's like,
right.
well, people that say it only use 12 Greek manuscripts are just misleading you. It's like it's false. I was like, okay, well, what does
Interesting.
this person have to say? That is
Well,
interesting
how do you
because
know we're false? Yeah. Okay.
yeah, it's
Sure.
like I thought the Textus Receptus was 12 manuscripts.
Yeah.
And
Correct me,
their
please.
apologetic case for this is just because it is 12 doesn't mean that it's not a good faithful translation. God could have God could have faithfully preserved his word for word with these 12 good manuscripts. I was like, okay, so
Okay.
you did just use 12.
Yeah. Like no one's arguing that.
Yeah,
I thought you said it's not just 12.
exactly. It
But now
was
you're
so
telling me if it's
misleading.
only 12, it's okay. I'm like, I agree. Like I didn't. That wasn't. That's a straw man. It's like I never
Exactly.
said that. Oh
But
gosh,
yeah,
so
you could
frustrating.
see that like this website was just it was so offended and it was so on its
Huh.
heels regarding that question. So and yeah,
It's like you're mad over an argument I didn't even try to make. like I like
but
I.
it does
Uh,
go to show. I mean, as I
yeah.
said earlier with the critical text, we have a lot more and we have a lot better.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but you know, it's sort of a sore nerve, I guess, for King James
Like
people.
what? And then I don't know. Like part of me's like, I'm like, what do you if yours is like the one and the author, like what do you have to be intimidated by?
Right.
Like why are you on your heels? Like it's just the irony, right? I'm not trying to poke at anyone. It's not trying to
Yeah.
you know touch any more nerves, I guess, than we already are. But it's just like, man, like if you really got like the bee's knees, the best Bible translation, then like don't be arrogant, but then you got nothing to like be worried about, man. Like show up. Just be
Yeah.
like, dude, I know what I got.
Yeah, and we got to
But like the
remember
irony is
this.
like, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we got to remember this entire history of translations. What are we trying to do? We're trying to represent the original written down word to anyone that is willing to hear as faithfully as possible.
From the
And it's
priest
just
to the plowshare boy.
yeah, it's
Let's
just
go.
the sheer fact, Dave, that you and I on this podcast are not speaking Koine Greek. We're
Mm,
speaking English.
ground level, baby. I'm so sorry. Let's go.
And it's taken all these years and many scholars
Yeah.
working with as close to the original with as much information as possible to get to where we're at today. The King James was an awesome version at its time, for its time, and it still is a great version. But,
Right.
you know, we have developed since
We
then.
have better ones.
Yeah,
Like,
and so there's nothing to knock them. I love my King James folks, even though I do think you're a bit culty sometimes. But you know, it's one good translation amongst others, and I do think, you know, with the ESV we have better text. Actually, I'll say this as well. The HCSB and the CSB, I have people asking me about this one.
oh, yeah. What do you want to
I
know?
I've looked at different texts very quickly, I've looked at a handful of different texts that are typically the like controversial ones that people tend to
Mm-hmm.
change the most. And here's what I
Yep.
found. The CSB or the HCSB has been good, just as good as the ESV in how it handles all those texts. The only thing that I noticed that the CSB and the HCSB does is it will change word order. And the
Yeah.
ESV is a little bit more word for word, and we'll unpack that in a sec, in which it tries to be as faithful to the Greek and the Hebrew as possible. So sometimes
It's a little
you,
choppy.
yeah, it would have sounded better if maybe the sentence was a different way.
It's like you sound
Um,
like Yoda. Like we always say, like you sound like Yoda sometimes.
yeah, and it's not that bad with like Yoda, but
No.
because it still reads normally in English, but it's just not the like smoothest. What I found is the HCSB and the CSB actually changes that. So it is still essentially the ESV, but it reads just a little bit better.
Like more like imagine like if like yeah, I walk outside with my dog, or I could say I walk my dog outside.
Exactly. That's the
Like
only thing that I noticed that's
did
the
I
difference.
really change the Bible? You
Right.
know, it's like I literally made the same point.
Yeah.
Like, and so you're
So
welcome.
that's
See, that's
that
how easy it is, folks.
yeah,
Bam.
that's just one thing that I noticed because I did have a lot of people asking me
Well,
about
there's
that.
also you gotta be careful too, and I know people that use the CSB that preach from it.
Hmm.
There's also just because while we're on it, very
Yeah, yeah,
quickly.
and I didn't know enough. Like I
Also
just did a yeah.
the plural adelphoi, brothers,
Hmm.
and you see it in the plural where they, you default to the masculine, and it can refer to men and women. Um,
Yeah.
they're not adding to scripture. They're just trying to encompass, the full inclusion of that term where it's like when Paul is addressing, brothers in Galatia, like the church in Corinth, my brothers
Right.
here, they'll say brothers and sisters
Hmm.
because it's
Yeah.
like, hey, there's not just men at this church. The sketchy
Yeah.
thing, the sketchy thing is, and anyone in the comment section, correct me if I'm wrong. Uh, I don't know if they do it for every single exact occurrence, but I've personally heard it where like I have guys that really like the CSB. This isn't a deal breaker for them, why they like will suddenly stop preaching from it, but it's something that they have like a potential pitfall that they have to kind of work around is some of the language when they might say adelphoi and they might only mean brothers,
Hmm.
not brothers and sisters. And you have to be real careful because you are making an assumption.
Yeah.
Hey, is this Paul addressing the church as a whole or just like the elders or brothers of the church?
Yeah, that is an
And
interpretation.
and how do you know if you're like because it's like when you say brothers, I do not permit a woman to teach. Are you saying men and women? Hey, brothers and sisters, I don't permit a woman to teach? Or are
Hmm.
you saying like, hey, men, like brothers, don't let a women teach necessarily? That's what I mean by like the controversy potential. Like you see what I
Yeah.
mean? How do you work that out where it's like are you, it could work either way. You could find a way to make it work.
Hmm.
But it's like how do you know the right one? You know? Um that's why I like the
Yeah.
ESV and it just says brothers. Again,
Well, I mean,
we're not trying to
it
promote the
doesn't
ESV.
take out
Just saying.
the need to interpret, right? And I think that's the safest option
Right.
is keep it keep it as is. Um, but yeah, no, I didn't
Exactly.
notice that about it. But then again, like I said,
I found that out. I heard that.
I went over a handful of what I know to be the most controversial passage in translating,
Sure.
especially today. So I'll look at like Genesis, I'll look at
Go to Jude.
yeah, a bunch of those texts and see how they translate them. Um,
All the
what's
brackets. Just kidding.
yeah, what's
I'm
funny
just playing.
is some people are really sensitive to when something like the word man is changed to mankind because they're like, oh, it's
Yeah.
supposed to, and it's like, well, actually, that
Right.
word is referring to mankind.
Right.
Um,
And it's like, how do we know when to take these liberties and when not? It's a lot of history.
yeah,
on
But
our
I
side.
just found some people are really sensitive to that because the moment they hear that, they're like, oh, it's going liberal. And it's like, no, actually, that's what it means. They're just bringing that out. So, yeah, no. Oh, actually,
Well, and
let's go
actually,
ahead and, yeah, go ahead.
like bring up that slide because that I'm like
Yeah.
bring no, well, bring up
So,
the slide because that's like that goes right into where it's like because I had a lady that made a concept mistake because of a word mistake. Like I've
mhm,
had this happen at two churches ago, where when she saw in John 1:14, when the word became flesh,
hmm.
and she was reading flesh the way Paul talks about flesh,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. With like,
like because
my
because like
flesh is
everyone,
sinful. I have
right,
to wage
and
war against the flesh.
right, and so but folks, like if you're reading Greek, flesh here, flesh there, same Greek word, sarx.
Hmm.
And so if you're translating it on a word level, right, sarx and sarx, the word became flesh. Hey, I don't want to do the works of the flesh. I want to, walk in the
Hmm.
spirit. And so it's like, if you were doing thought for thought, it's like, okay, two very different thoughts. If you're trying to do, dynamic equivalence,
Hmm.
you cannot translate these verses the same. Where it's like,
Right.
oh yeah, Jesus is flesh. That means he sinned. That's bad, heresy. And not all translation. Do you remember doing our classes when we are learning Greek and Hebrew? And it's
Yeah.
like you had like students that were so worried that they were accidentally gonna like commit a heresy because they got the quiz question
Yeah.
wrong or something. And it's like, hey, like there are passages like that. Not every
Mhm.
passage is a make or break. You translated it wrong and now you're going to hell. Um, it's like, but like you would like if you translated Sark's like concept like word for like thought for thought. Sorry, John 1:14, the way you would like Galatians 5. Like, yeah, you just committed a heresy if you did thought for thought as if it was the same. But on a word for word level, exact same. It's the same
Mm.
word. No one's gonna judge you for like, hey, you translated sarx as flesh. That's because sarx means flesh.
Yeah.
But that's why you have to, and the
Yeah,
same reason why,
people
well,
mistake the
like why some people
theology
say
of a
works of
word
sin.
as opposed to the translation of a word.
Yeah, and which that's why it frustrates us sometimes when we do see these thought for thoughts when someone will translate, hey, I don't want to work out, the desires of, my sin nature or like desires of sin. It's like, well, because there's a Greek word for sin. So you don't need like it's like he said flesh, so say flesh. If you like you're trying to communicate like, oh, it's my works of sin.
Hmm.
It's like, well, like you're communicating the same meaning, but like do you need to make that adjustment when there is a Greek word for sin and Paul would have said sin if he meant sin, you know? And so that's how we get into the weeds with these things, folks. Do the first Peter, like
Yeah,
do the actual
let's go
verse
back
now.
to First Peter.
Sorry.
Dave expertly pronounced it for
A-
us and read
And
that
I
for
was
us.
reading the bottom line, by the way, not the transliteration, not to use
Yeah,
another big T word, but I was
yeah.
reading the bottom line. Thank you very much.
And
Okay.
I can actually vouch for that, folks. It's for us, having known Greek, it's actually harder to read that top line than it is to read the bottom.
Believe it or not. I know it
um,
sounds crazy, but it really is.
we know how the bottom one is absolutely supposed to be pronounced, but when you see it in the English, like you can pronounce a couple of those things different ways. So that bottom line is actually far easier to pronounce than reading the actual transliteration.
Which is why I
Um,
kind of like buffered when I was like, what?
yeah.
Like it says humone at the very end. Why doesn't it say humone at the top? I'm just like,
Yeah.
anyway, sorry.
I unpacked that in my class a little bit more because this is in the middle of like a whole thing. Anyways,
Right, right.
so First Peter 1:13, we read it in the Greek. That doesn't help us, but working from the Greek, here's a little. I'm tipping my hat a little bit
I'm
to the
glad you
King
did the
James.
wherefore. Sorry.
Yeah,
Wherefore?
it's this is a
It's,
good thing because the King James in this point in time tries to stick as hardcore to the Greek as possible.
right,
So it
right.
says, "Wherefore gird up the loins of your mind." Folks, what does that even mean?
It's a
gird
euphemism,
up
right?
the
Yeah.
loins of your mind. Like people don't even know what loins means, let alone girding up. Like what is that? I mean, we're gonna go into all sorts of uncharted territory that can lead to disaster, especially today with
Let's
people trying to
eisegete.
figure out what that means and how to apply it.
Dude, I'm ready
Um,
to eisegete. I'm serious.
yeah.
Let's do it. Let's come up with all the cool.
Now, a thought for thought, because that's word for word. They're taking wherefore,
It
therefore,
says loins.
gird up. That's the in loins, and so that's word for word. It's taking it. Now, thought for thought, the ESV actually goes thought for thought because it's a dynamic equivalent. It
Right.
bounces between the two, and it translates this verse as hit the wrong thing.
Don't do that.
And therefore, preparing your minds for action. Wow. Okay. So there is no loins. There is no girding up. Okay. Where did we go from that? Right. Okay. So the word for word is taking, like I said, Greek word translate, Greek word translate, Greek word translate. That's what it's doing. The thought for thought is saying what's it saying though.
Right.
So for those of you that don't know, girding up is to take your robe and kind of like grab it and pull it up and then tie it off so that essentially your robe is tied to like your legs and your hips in such a way where you can now run freely. So
Yeah, and
that
not
is to
trip. Let's
gird
go.
up your robes, to essentially hike them up and tie them off so you're ready to fight war, you're ready
Yeah,
to
it's
run, you're
street
ready to
basketball,
work.
dude. It's street basketball when you tuck your basketball shorts into your boxer briefs. Okay,
Exactly.
everybody? That's what it is. Just so you know.
So Peter here is saying gird up, tie up, grab that robe and bring it up. The loins, which we all know what the loin section is. I just kind of said what girding up the loins is to hike it up and tie it off right around at your hips. So gird up the loins of your mind. Okay. Get ready to run for your mind. Prepare yourself for your mind, or as the ESV translate it, preparing your minds for action. So you can see word for word, it's translating that Greek, it's translating the phrase that's commonly used in that time. But the thought for thought is taking that one step forward and saying, hey, this very archaic phrase is not going to be helpful for us
Yeah.
understanding it, but I can say the exact same thing in a different way. And so the ESV actually just goes thought for thought in this instance and says preparing your minds for action. So
So
we see a
good.
thought for thought rather than a word for word there difference. And
And
then
did they change the Bible? You know what I mean? Like, did they change scripture? You know, did they do what John says not to do? They added to the Bible. It's like, did
no.
we? Or did you actually, or did we know, hey, this is a euphemism that the original audience definitely would have understood.
Yeah.
But in
And
order to best communicate it to this new audience, it's like we need to come up with what here it comes, a dynamic equivalent,
yep.
you know? Like that's where we get it from.
And we're really transparent about this stuff. I mean, we really are like we
ESV has
develop
footnotes
Bibles
too.
like
Let's
this
look
and
at
then
them.
and then we put it down in the footnotes if we
Yeah.
think it's something like this where people might be troubled about it. Like, hey, just so you know, this phrase means this, or
Like, well, at least let
sometimes
you know what we're
yeah.
kind of tweaking. I literally had when I went to Haiti, I had one of my translators. I didn't even realize that I like nonchalantly I did a euphemism that didn't translate.
That
Where
happens
I
so
was doing, I
much
was
in
like,
foreign languages.
I was sharing my testimony about how like there was a moment in my life that I got really, I did two euphemisms. I said this was a moment in my life when I got really bent out of shape, and I had to realize that that's just how the cookie crumbles. I did two euphemisms, two sentences, two euphemisms. And he looked at me and he was like, bent out of shape. cookie crumbles. Like we had to pause the lesson, you know?
That's so
Uh,
funny.
and
It's
and
like,
that's
wait, you were contorted. Were you possessed? What was
yeah,
going on here?
like this, like you said it wasn't a big deal, but like you got deformed. Like, and like because he's trying to do, I know you everyone's laughing, but that's what we mean by like
Hmm.
some word for word. I don't know. Or like that's how the cookie crumbles. Like and like I ended up having to like give me a second. And I'm like, this is what I mean. I was in this situation and I got really worked up. I got exhausted and scared and worried, and it was all over nothing. And because sometimes that's just how life happens and occurs. And my translator was like, "Oh," like it was like instant,
Yeah,
like, "Hey," because and that's what we like the ESV did, where it's like, "This is what they're saying, and this is what they mean."
yeah.
Uh, and don't get me wrong, you still have to fact check that, right? You have to
Hmm.
make sure that they act like it's a bold statement. Be like, "Oh, this is what they said, but this is what they mean." You know
Right,
how scary, like you should tune me out as a pastor if I go, "Hey, this is what the Bible says, but this is what it really means."
right.
It'd be like, "Okay," and I'm turning you off. um, no, but like
Right.
these are Bible scholars. I'm trusting that as the Lord led men by the Holy Spirit to write the original language, I'm trusting that God is going to use the Holy Spirit to help these men translate it too.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's why we can have faith in it. Um, And so actually I really ended up not just doing word for changing word from word to thought for the translator. I'm pretty sure he paraphrased what I said even after that, by the way. Because because I said like all like everything I just said to you in that illustration.
Hmm.
He said like 4 words.
That's so funny. He
So
got confused.
I'm like I don't know how you got all that out of that, but okay. But like, hey, language to language, there's barriers, dude,
Yeah.
and you're trying to find the best equivalent to communicate what you think I'm trying to communicate.
Hmm. One other thing I'll point out here is Dio. It, it's in the King James it says wherefore. It's pretty good. I don't really know what wherefore is exactly used as. And in the ESV, a little bit more contemporary is therefore, which is a pretty. I mean, that's a good translation of Dio, in that instant. So you got a good translation in both of those. But I'm just bringing this out for our paraphrase. Because in there you see it starts with so, not therefore. So it's like, okay, that's not a bad transitionary therefore, because you can say, well, all this being said, so you
For
should
this
do this.
reason,
Yeah.
yeah,
So you can see the paraphrase is taking a little is taking more liberties than the word for word or the thought for thought, because it's now paraphrasing this entire, either word for word or thought for thought. It's paraphrasing the entire thing and really trying to get down to the just the nugget of what's being said.
yeah.
And so we're more further removed, and the NLT is a paraphrase. It's actually my favorite paraphrase, and I
It's mine
recommend it
too.
to,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I
good.
recommend
It's a
it to
good one.
everyone starting their Bible process.
Yeah, it's just
Um,
there's always one pitfall though. Just like there's always that one pitfall of potential oversimplification.
right, yeah.
You just go too far where it's like you dumbed it down too much. Like, yeah, it's
Hmm.
like we're missing out on some things that I thought was, worth noting.
Yeah, I mean
you know?
it's true. I'm not so worried about that when I recommend it to newbies, because I'm just like
No, no, not at all. And I love
yeah.
it. I really do love it. Hear me, everybody. I love it. I love it. Okay.
But I mean all this to say, folks, too, is like even in the word for word, thought for thought paraphrase, all three of them have their moments,
Right.
right? All three of them have their application when they should be used. Like I said, the paraphrase, the NLT, I recommend that to everyone just starting to read the Bible. It's the Bible that helped me read the entire Bible for the first time. And so I have been a huge subscriber to that if you're reading your Bible for the first time. Just take in the story, just take in the nugget, okay? And then now I'm an ESV guy. Now I'm going very much as close to the Greek as I can while also being faithful to it. And then if I go real deep, I actually just go to the Greek instead. So,
Oh, so you're so
um,
smart. Like, dude, have you ever done that? Like our translation, like as pastors, there have been times where I'm like, I got a passage, and I was like, I've read it 4 times,
mhm.
and I'm still just trying to get the gist. NLT.
Yep, I do the same thing.
And I'm like,
There are
oh, so that's
sometimes
what
that
it's
happens.
saying. Like, oh, okay, so that's what it is. And then you don't stop there. Then you go back and you go like, okay, this is the framework I'm working in.
Hmm.
This is the gist. And now I can start getting into the nitty gritty, finer details.
Yeah, and
Um,
sometimes
because we're
sometimes I'll
human.
it's funny. It's sort of like a pendulum swing for me sometimes because I'll be reading the ESV. I'm like, what happened here? Why am I so lost? Go back to the NLT. That's what happened. And then the pendulum will swing, and I'll go to the Greek and I'll go, why did I get lost here?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now in light of what I do know with the NLT clarifying it for me, what got lost in the translation while I was reading the ESV that my mind wasn't getting that the NLT clarified that was being represented in the Greek. And that's a
Ironically.
nerdy
Yeah.
thing where I'm just like, oh, they're faithfully translating this word, and my mind, it's the end of the night, and so it just wasn't as sharp as it should have been, and so I needed the NLT to kind of clarify that for me. So I sort
It's
of
just
do a
ironic,
pendulum swing
right?
sometimes.
It's just, and I'm not trying to rant. It's just, and that's just why it's always good to kind of just compare, because it's like the
Yeah,
irony sometimes. It's like, whoa, 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 the paraphrase is more word for word than the you went thought for thought here, and ironically, the paraphrase actually did a better job with the word, and
right.
it's like, what, like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Um,
So
it's just good to be well rounded. You have a
mhm.
full orbed understanding of a particular text.
Yeah, and then you have the
Really fun.
GLT, that's the ground living translation. No, I'm just
Oh
kidding.
gosh, let's go. Yes, we've done that before. Like, oh, that's the Dave translation,
Right.
because like I paraphrased the
I'm
paraphrase
gonna use that now, the
just to
GLT.
make the
Oh my
point.
goodness.
It's like, sorry, and that's probably not accurate, but hey, grain of salt.
Hey, GLT, man.
No
It's
footnote.
a hit or miss sometimes.
And it's a you swing right through, dude.
That's funny.
Man,
Well,
right on.
folks, I hope this was a lot of fun. I hope this was really helpful for you guys because I do get that question a lot from time to time. And as you can see, here we are, we're at a full episode, about an hour and a half. And and that's the conversation you have to have. I mean, to really understand where we're at and how we got here. Um, and we still have so much more to say. I mean, we didn't talk about the canon, how the Bible got collected. We didn't talk about what's considered God's word and how we know that it's God's word as opposed to everything else. There's
We're
so
giving you
much
the
we
tools.
didn't cover.
We're
Um,
just giving you the
but
tools.
we did do something very specific, and it is a question I have gotten a lot, and it's why do we have so many different translations and how did we get here? And so this episode I thought would be phenomenal for you guys. And Dave and I, we both agreed and we both knew there could be some major benefit from doing a podcast on this. Frankly, so that I can now say, hey, you should go look up this video instead of answering you. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. If you really want to know what I think about it, you can go here. That saves so much time after church on Sundays.
It does. And so I am thankful for it. I mean, I probably will actually recommend people do that, but of course I'll always still answer the
Oh,
question
heck yeah.
right there in the moment. But it is good to have this information out there so that anyone just maybe you're coming to the faith and you somehow stumbled across GLT. It'd be great to actually get a bearings on in your new walk with Christ, in understanding all the different translations, and then maybe now you know which Bible to pick. Because now you're like, oh, I didn't know that. Actually, I'm going to go out, since it's my first Bible, I'm going to go grab an NLT. So yeah, guys, I hope this was a huge help. Dave, do you want to add anything before we close out here?
Um, Part of me is no, but part of me is kind of like I grew up with a guy that's like, the best Bible translation you can get is the one you're actually going to read.
Yeah.
But obviously I have preferences. We all, I want you to pick a Bible translation that you will actually try to read every
Right.
day, cover to cover, and just learn so much about the God who made you, and his story of redemption to have an eternity with you.
Right.
I think the ESV does it really, really well. Maybe better than others.
We are not
Yeah, I'm not
sponsored
ashamed.
by the ESV, folks. We aren't.
No, hey, Crossway, if you want that to happen though, I'm all for having as many Bibles as possible.
Yes, please. I'll sign it tonight.
Yep, and I may or may not find a way to get them into China or Canada if something changes. But allegedly, but I do.
Just
Yeah, because
randomly
you know
throwing
what?
the word.
I want a farm boy or some dude that like,
Mm,
hey, I don't care.
yeah.
Buy the Bible that you will read every word on every page. But know that there's a reason why there's others that exist. Sorry, I wasn't trying to go on a rant. I
No,
wanted to
yeah,
try to keep it
absolutely.
simple where it's like, please read your Bibles. But then at the same time, it's like, do you see why there are as many translations as there are? You go to Bible Gateway and you click the drop down, and
Yeah.
you're like, I didn't even know.
Yeah, we
And these
didn't
are
even
just
cover a
English.
fraction of those either.
Yeah,
We covered the
exactly.
main ones essentially.
Um,
But we didn't cover a lot of them.
but I hope you really did enjoy it because
Yeah.
I did. I'm all like giggly and like this is like this sounds like I hope we made it fun for you because like
hmm
sometimes this could be like a drier topic. Sometimes like
Yeah.
if you're not into history and you're not into Bible and you go the history of the Bible. So I hope me being a little bubbly kind of
Yeah.
helped.
And if you want to see some
Stupid.
movies or something on that, I think they have something on either Tyndale or Wycliffe. Probably both of those.
Yeah,
They did
they
like a
do. Maybe
dramatic
it's
movie
Angel
on them.
Studios or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it was
It's like
pretty
or maybe
good.
it's Order.
Yeah.
Oh, and recommended resource, Living by the Book, dude. Remember
Oh yeah,
that?
absolutely.
Dude,
hmm
hermeneutics all
Hendrickson
day.
is the author, right?
Yes, Hendrickson. That was
Yeah.
hermeneutics and Bible introduction. We had to do it for 2 classes.
Yeah.
That's how legit it was. I'm like, good thing I already read it, but I'll read it again.
Right? It's very readable. We do recommend that, folks. And in this entire conversation, like I said, it's been a full episode. It's been an hour and a half. To be frank, and I know Dave will agree with me, this this episode itself, as long as it was a paraphrase of the
I'm so
conversations.
sorry. I
There
just
is so
busted up.
much information on this out there. And as I said, I developed this from the information I got. You are welcome to correct me. I am not inerrant. So yeah, this it's sort of a little fun little joke there at the end that this whole thing is a paraphrase, but it is also true. It's essentially a very short summary for a very long conversation. We really hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, because we put a lot of work into this stuff, folks. Don't forget to share, because this information needs to get out there. Share it with the little boy in plowing the field. All right, we got to get this information out there. And don't forget to comment. Don't forget to comment what you think, what you thought about this, what your favorite translation is. Yeah, any questions that you guys have. We love this conversation, and we love having it with you guys, and we love each and every one of you. So we just want to thank you guys for being with us this entire time, and in learning with us, and having the conversation with us. And with that being said, we're gonna catch you guys in the next episode.
It
See
might be
ya.
in Latin.